Well, listen, welcome everybody. It's good that we've been able to have this time set aside. I understand it's bank holiday weekend. Really appreciate the time that you're given to do this. People will be joining us, and then also this is going to be made available later on a website, which I will let you know. But just so you know, you're in the right sort of Zoom meeting, which a couple of weeks ago I found I wasn't in the right Zoom meeting, but there we are. But this is about facing up to race, generating justice. And this particular evening is about the younger generation, it's about leadership, it's about shaping the future. That's the sort of topic we're going to be talking about all around about race. So welcome. This particular evening is going to be a partnership between Mosaic Justice Network and M13. So thank you, M13, for being part of that partnership for this evening. Really appreciate it. On the technical side of things, just to say that our technician Tim is going to ensure that we're all muted apart from the people who are participating at any given time, and it's also going to be recorded. So if you don't want your face to be seen, then obviously do what Solo has done and just be on audio. That would be really, really good for that to happen. We shall be up to an hour and a quarter. It may be less than that, but the latest we'll be finishing is 8:15. But depending on how the conversation goes, we may be finishing a little bit early, maybe even at 8 o'clock. With the actual conversations and presentations that are taking place, if you have any questions you want to ask, then please use the chat facility at the bottom of Zoom. If you put your cursor, you're probably all PhD students in Zoom by now after the lockdown. But if you haven't put your cursor down there, you'll see numbers of different elements coming up at the bottom. One that says chat, and you just click on chat and you can write a question you want to pose to any of the people who are participating, and we shall then look at that and pass it on. Beatrice is going to be taking this part on for me and for us as two organisations, and she'll make the introductions. But first of all, just before we start, let me pray, and then I'll hand over to Beatrice. So let's pray for just a moment. Father God, we want to ask that you will be with us tonight. We try to get into that understanding of trying to be thinking we're in this room, same room together at a table, drinking coffee, having conversations. That's the sort of environment we want to create this evening, where it is relational. And so we ask that you will season our lips with grace, that you will open our hearts to challenges and new thoughts. Or been thinking about the book of Amos recently and how much of a social activist he was, a great crafted rhetorician of challenging the powers to be of things that needed to change. Lord, reminded that it was Martin Luther King who quoted from Amos in his great speech where he said, "Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never failing stream." And we echo that again this evening, that this is our prayer, what we want to happen. In your name of Jesus, amen. Beatrice, thank you again for helping us tonight, and it's over to you now.
Thanks so much, Andrew. So tonight, I'm really grateful for those of you who can join us. And tonight we are just going to have a conversation, like Andrew said, imagining as though we're in the same room, having a cup of coffee, having this chat about facing up to race. This is a third installment in the Mosaic Justices conversations. The other two conversations can be found on the Mosaic Justices YouTube channel. The first one was looking at the two pandemics, the pandemics obviously of COVID-19, which disproportionately has been affecting people from the BAME community, and also then looking at the pandemic of race and racism, as we've seen explode in the last few months all across the world, really. And so, yeah, so looking at that, this then becomes a third installment of that conversation. And so if you're interested in looking at what happened and listening to the other two, absolutely welcome. And I'd absolutely encourage you to go to the YouTube channel and have a look. But tonight we are excited to be looking at generations, looking at specifically at the next generation, looking at how race and racism affects young people, affects people of the next generation. And this is a conversation that personally, as a mum, I'm interested in. I was just saying beforehand that my children this morning, we were having conversations over the coffee table following the passing of Chadwick Boseman, And this is something that we know that our children are listening to right now. This is something that we know the young people are listening to right now. And so I'm really pleased to be joined by Gabriel and by Christy tonight, who are both incredible youth workers and who are passionate about youth and young people. And so tonight they'll be talking to us, sharing their own personal stories, and also sharing their own kind of, I guess, uptake on this issue. So Gabriel is a youth worker from M13, and he is working in a project which is in Adwick. It's an inner, it's part of Manchester, and he studied youth work at theology and theology at the Nazarene Theological College. We are actually colleagues. I'm studying there as well at the moment, and he is someone who regularly participates in football, boxing, and from what I understand, he is absolutely passionate about young people. So I'm really pleased that he can join us tonight. And I'm also joined by Christy Sperling, who is the Chief Executive of Engage. She's an incredible charity in Manchester, helping young people reach their full potential. And he is also passionate about helping young people and doing incredible work in the city. He's also, from what I've learned, a petrol head, somebody who loves cars. And so that's something that comes out a lot when you get to know him. But he is mostly really involved in seeing things change for the sake of young people in the city. Christy's an MBE as well, having won awards for the work that he does with young people in the city. So it's an incredible privilege to be able to speak to both of you tonight. So what we will do tonight is that we are going to hear from Gabriel, and then we're going to hear from Christy, and then the three of us will then have a conversation about what they've shared tonight. So I'm going to hand over to you, Gabriel, to then tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then obviously go into your part of the talk, and then you can hand over to Christy afterwards.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Yes, I am Gabriel. I am a youth worker for M13 Youth Project based in Ardwick. I started off as a young person who used to participate in the activities with Helen as my manager, and I've had the opportunity to volunteer to do my placement there and to now become a worker, which I'm grateful for. I want to start with a quote from Malcolm X. He was in an interview when he was asked about the progress in the country of America around racial issues. And he replied by saying, "I don't feel there is progress. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's not progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And they haven't even pulled the knife out, much less healed the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there." I'll leave you to ponder that. But I think it's very relevant in this day and age in terms of the world we live in around race. Speaking on experiences of racism that I've faced, I almost see it in two parts. In my early childhood years, like, let's say up until 10, I hadn't experienced kind of overt discrimination about my race, but I always knew growing up as a child in school and around peers that there was a shame attached to being African and a shame attached to being Black. And I couldn't articulate why that was the case, but I just knew that I didn't want to be African, I didn't want to be Black. And I think that demonstrates that from a young age, we understand race in a certain way. And looking at the Clark doll experiment, I don't know if anyone has heard of it or seen it or seen the video. It was an experiment done in America in the 1940s where children of different races were shown two dolls, a black doll and a white doll, and they were asked which doll is the nice doll, which doll is the ugly doll, which doll is the good doll, which doll is the bad doll. And the large majority of the children, if not all, said that the black doll was the ugly doll, the bad doll, not the good doll. And the consequences from that study shown that by the ages of 5, African American children were able to associate inferiority with the color of their skin. And only in hindsight and growing up was I able to understand that also as a young child. But at the time, I didn't understand it. And having a black son also, I can see the similar undertones, racial undertones, which might be projected in him, projected on him as a child through the media, through what he sees. And one example I like to give is the Ninja Turtles cartoon. Recently, I found it really interesting that looking at the names of the Ninja Turtles, Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, Leonardo, they were all named after European artists who were the epitome of knowledge, creativity, wisdom, all of that good stuff. And the villains were named Rocksteady, Bebop, and Shredder. What I didn't know was that Rocksteady, Bebop, and Shredder were forms of African American jazz, and just the connotation that the goodies, the heroes were named after Europe elites, and the baddies, the villains, were named after African forms of music, and that is very subconscious and almost insidious ways of shaping and creating a internal racial battle within yourself as a child. And I think it would be fair to say that Black children face that in every aspect of society growing up. That was what I experienced as a child. Um, Moving on to my teenage years, I experienced racism from the hands of the police, and this was in the form of stop and search, racial profiling and stereotyping, that we were stopped and searched on numerous occasions without reasonable grounds. We were antagonized and provoked. I had a friend who was beat up just outside of the youth club we attended because police thought he was someone else who had committed a crime. And this is something which relationship with the police in the Black community has been extremely poor, and something which we've seen in recent months, something which has come to the forefront in recent months, but Black people will tell you we've always experienced from the times of Rodney King in the late 80s, even before that, from the abolishment of slavery, and how Blacks were then recaptured by the formation of the police was due to recapture slaves and put them back into prisons. And seeing all the things that have happened with George Floyd and this week with Jacob Blake, sometimes we think that this isn't a problem within the UK, but I'm just going to say some names of people that have died in the last 20 years in the UK in police custody. And I'm going to say their names because we almost to give life to it, because sometimes I don't think as a nation we believe it happens in the UK, because our police don't have guns, but people still die in police custody because of how the police restrain Black people. Statistics tells us that we are twice as likely to die in police custody than our white counterparts. So the names of those people: Christopher Older, Sean Rigg, Colin Roach, Mark Duggan, Kingsley Burrell, Rashawn Charles, Leon Briggs, Sarah Reed, Shaku Bayoy, and Darren Cumberbatch. Those are just a handful of names of people that have died in police custody, and there's been no convictions to police. Racism for me is an interesting concept, in that when we talk about race and racism, a lot of the times the conversation is based on individual acts of racism. Someone calling a Black person the N-word, a Black person calling a white person some other form of racial slur, and it's rarely looked at institutionally on a bigger picture. And if I could ask you these questions, but we're all on mute, I would ask, what is racism? And again, from my experience, a lot of people see it as individual acts, but I want to share a definition of racism from the Macpherson report, which says that racism is that which is covertly or overtly resides in policies, procedures, operations, and culture of public or private institutions, reinforcing individual prejudices and being reinforced by them in turn. If racist consequences follow institutional laws, customs, or practices, that institution is racist, whether or not the individual maintaining those practices have racial intentions. And from my experience, what we found with racism, that it exists in almost every institution that the world has to offer, whether that's education, health, war, economy. And for me, we have to ask the question how we can challenge this and how we can fight this. And one thing that I'm really kind of, or one solution I reckon is through the educational system and the curriculum, in that we give an accurate portrayal of kind of the conquest of the British Empire in our history lessons, and going to school in the UK. The short bit of history we learned about Black history was about slavery, and nothing else. Not about the achievements of the great achievements of Black people within society, or not about the true happenings of the British Empire and colonialism. And I believe until we get that and win the hearts and minds of people in the country, that's when we can start trying to ensure political change and policy change, in that we are aware of, we have to admit the evils of the British Empire in terms of appropriating, colonizing, raping, pillaging, mass genocide around the world. And I think once people begin to understand that in an accurate way, then that will change in the narrative, which is then followed after in the rhetoric. Because the rhetoric that we have from that is not accurate. Also, challenging racism in every aspect on the grassroots. And for me, that has to be done with the support of allies, white allies. This has been a word used a lot in recent months. You see allies at protests, you see allies fighting with the police. Now, all of that is great. It's not great to be fighting with the police, but having allies standing by your side, regardless of the means for freedom, is good. But the everyday actions that we need to take, whether that's challenging an employer in terms of racist decision making they make. I had a friend who was a head doorman in a club in Manchester, and his boss told him, I want you to separate all the African and Black names on the CV that have applied for jobs. Separate all the African Black names and separate all the white names. And once you've done that, throw the African names in the bin, because we don't want to give employment to people that have African Black names. And while understanding it would be very difficult for him to challenge, him being a Black man, Maya, to challenge the system because of fear of his own job and employment, I think it's important for white people in positions of power like that to be able to challenge the system and to question, why is that the case? Do you know what you're doing is a racial profile, discriminatory through race? And white people being in those positions to speak out against racism. As a youth worker, I find young people are demoralized, demotivated, and afraid to speak out against racism, which quite often they find in school. Certain policies which are kind of guised with racial terms, like when groups of young Black males are together, they are called gangs. When young people and young Black males are said are speaking to teachers, they are described as speaking loudly and aggressively. And until we have accurate representation in the school system with teachers, but also teachers that understand young people and are willing to listen to Black young people, then nothing is going to change. And we have to lobby against whether it's politicians, the educational system, to get as many accurate representation of ourselves in those positions. A quote which I heard from Rebecca Roberts, who works at the Center for Crime and Justice Studies. She said, "The countless times I have suffered racism and failed to call it out, instead just shrugging my shoulders and choosing to ignore the behavior, adds to the problem. And I wonder if I had challenged the racism and racists, would I have changed their view, or at least left those who witnessed the incident with the clear impression that the racism was wrong." This quote actually reminds me of a situation last year where, while I was working as a professional, this is another example of racism. So I had my childhood forms of racism, my teenage forms of racism with police, but also as a professional youth worker while working, I was stopped by police when I was sorting out a dispute between young people and another member of the public. There was a fight going on, and we knew the young people, so I was trying to have a duty of care to protect them from the fight, being non-threatening and non-physical, but standing in between. The police come, but I end up being arrested and handcuffed and told, "Look at the size of you. You could be threatening to me, so I'm going to put you in cuffs." I'm not so ignorant to think that my race wasn't involved in that policeman's thinking, also by my size. But part of my thinking was, there's no point complaining, there's no point challenging, because this happens all the time, and I just shrug it off. We went to the police office to actually make a complaint, but I could have taken it further. But there is something about seeing and hearing so many cases of police officers being set free from racial injustice. So many instances of not getting justice, and I partly have probably internalized that. But maybe this is where the strength of the Father, Heavenly Father, to support us and to support me in pushing through adversity and difficult times, and to having a family of believers who can support us through those times, and as a church, as a community. Because there are times when seeing Black people die over and over again on social media it desensitizes you, and you somehow feel like this pain is normal, and it becomes normalized. And that is a place I don't want to be in, and that's the place I don't want our young people to be in. And yeah, I feel like as a family, we have to continually speak up against these injustices. In how long do I have, Beatrice? Oh, okay,
You're okay to keep going for just a couple of more minutes.
Okay, I'll make this last point in terms of what I do in the community with my young people. So we are a very politicized spiritual group at M13. We have a passion for social justice, and that plays out in our work, in our conversations with young people, and our projects. We created a politics group, which came from hearing the stories of young people, the difficulties they face, the separation they have with the political system through the lack of representation, through the belief that politicians don't listen to them, don't care about them, their anger at racism, their anger at the poverty that they see. And this group kind of came together, listening to those needs, studying about politics, learning how we can make a difference, and encouraging them to take social action. And it was an amazing group. We invited Akala, who's a Black scholar musician, to come and speak to the group. And it was very encouraging to see young people come and be able to then make action which made a difference in their local community, which was about keeping the youth fund, which was going to be crushed by local government in their decision to try and scrap youth work. But we got a petition signed by over 4,000 people in the city to keep youth work, which is going. And now we want to rejuvenate and reintroduce that with our new cohort of young people. And yeah, having that political conversation and giving young people space to speak about their personal issues is very important, and listening also is very important, which we find that, which I would try and encourage all of us to do that, again, especially the white audience, in listening to the concerns, the experiences of people of color, and seeing where in your life you can stand as an ally to speak with them, and to support them in the push for social justice. I think that's everything.
That is absolutely excellent, Gabriel. And I've made loads of notes, which we'll come back to in a little while. And I know that those listening will have been taking lots in. That was incredibly enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate that, Gabriel. And I can't wait to delve deeper into some of what you said.
Yeah.
Christy, I'd love to hand over to you now, to just tell us a little bit more as well from your perspective, a bit about you. And I'm not going to take up too much of your time. So over to you, Christy.
No, that's fine. Thanks for that, Gabriel. That was really, really interesting and insightful. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the beginning for myself, really. I started my life in a children's home, and at the time, my now adopted mum used to work in social services and used to visit children and young people in children's homes. And one of the things that she noticed was that there was a lot of black, particularly lads, never getting put up for adoption or never getting fostered. And back in those days, staff would take children home for sort of like respite visits to give them a bit of time in the family and that kind of stuff. And my mum noticed, I guess not exclusively, my adopted mum noticed, not exclusively, but quite often a lot of the black children didn't get that opportunity. So her and my dad, who obviously you may have guessed by now, both my mum and my adoptive parents are both white, and they made a conscious decision to adopt 2 black children. And so they adopted me and my brother. We're not related in any way. And then from there, but my mum and dad, they had two children of their own. So there was obviously 4 white people in our family, and then me and my brother. And for me, whenever I think about that, that takes me right back to the heart of the challenge of sort of race and opportunity, and how people get treated at the start of their life for various reasons. And so that's how I ended up. So I basically grew up in a village in Cheshire. I was one of 3 black people. We were all adopted into white families, all 3 of us. And I grew up with just constant racism. Words that are used now in popular rap culture were thrown at me every day, and nobody ever challenged it, because it was just okay to say that because that's what everybody said. Teachers, my mum would have occasions where people would knock on a door and say, such and such a thing has happened in the village. And my mum would say, how do you know it was my son? And they say, because they were black. My mum used to think, well, they could have come in from Warrington or Altrincham, or they could have travelled in from all over. So there was just this constant stream, sort of racial profiling, I guess you'd call it. And that kind of went through primary school, went through secondary school. I felt in primary school, I felt like I was singled out a lot. My behaviour wasn't brilliant, I'm not going to lie, but I felt like I was treated slightly differently to my counterparts. And that became particularly more noticeable in high school, when I got excluded age 14 and put into a residential unit and effectively put back into care. And the reason why I'm sharing this now is because of what I wanted to kind of say is that this stuff we're talking about, it's stuff that's been kind of in my heart for the whole of my life. It's stuff that's incredibly difficult to talk about. I'm in a quite unique, not totally unique, but an interesting situation, because I guess I've kind of got my foot in both camps culturally, because I've obviously grown up in a white family. I'd say my upbringing was quite a white, we weren't exposed to sort of Caribbean food or anything like that, because it just wasn't the thing that my parents would ever have thought of doing, to be honest with you. And so as I've grown up and as I've got older and older, I've realised that I've had to challenge and had to learn when to kind of speak out about things that I don't agree with. In my earlier teens, when I sort of got to the age where I could drive and stuff, I have absolutely no doubt that if I ever hired a slightly nicer car, I was stopped by the police on numerous occasions, and they couldn't really give me an explanation for why they were stopping me, other than their own perception of why a black person might be driving a nice car. I've also, even on a kind of daily basis, just faced people's preconceived ideas of what black people can and can't do. I've been for interviews where I know that because of time, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I've been for interviews where I know that I've been treated very differently to other people. And when we've kind of got back into the room and done a debrief, my experience of being interviewed was totally different to other people's experiences. And so you learn to kind of be constantly defensive. So what do you do when you're in that situation? I guess you've got two choices. You can either kind of find your way within the system, or you can kind of create something for yourself where you can kind of become your own boss and find your own way through life. So for me, that was setting up my own charity, which we called Engage, because we wanted to engage young people. And there's a whole story about how we got involved in doing youth work and stuff. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of have at the start of it was that we were going to be open to everyone, inclusive to everyone, and that we weren't going to make judgments. So any young person that comes into our sessions, whether it's on our vehicles or in the centre or detached, we don't make judgments about them. We treat them as an individual. We work with them as they are, where they are, and how they are, and try and just get alongside them. And I think that's what's kind of carried us through for the past sort of 15 years, and sort of building a reputation. In terms of young people's experiences now, growing up, looking at what goes on in the media, looking at some of the challenges, there's things that I've noticed now as a 45-year-old bloke that kind of I find quite shocking. So I've never, I've been working in schools for years in various capacities, doing various jobs. I've never come across a black head teacher. I've done partnership work with GMP and police forces and other places, and I've never come across a police officer who's assistant chief constable, deputy chief constable, or chief constable. And I don't actually think there are any black chief constables in the UK. I'd have to double check, but I'm fairly sure that's correct. So there's all these, when you're talking about race and when you're talking about young people's experiences of growing up, and let's just take the education system as an example. If you're a black young person growing up in a school where you have very little black role models, then in my head that makes you think that it's possible that you can't aspire to do that. Same with the police. If you never ever see any black police officers that are above a certain level on the ground in a police force, to me that would make me as a young person think, well, that's something I can't aspire to, so why would I bother? Same with politics. I have interesting debates with my father-in-law about politics quite often, but one of the things I'm really challenged about and get quite agitated about is if you look at the cabinet, it doesn't really represent the multiculturalism of the UK at the moment. So you've got people making decisions, you've got influencers and sort of people who are in charge of budgets and that kind of stuff, making policies, but in actual fact, the vast majority of them are not necessarily reflective of the communities that they're trying to sort of have, make policies about, whatever. And so for me, as I think about all this stuff and everything that I see in the media and stuff, I actually think, well, there's got to come a point where we stop talking about what the injustices are and we actually start thinking about how we're going to right them. And for me, that's about representation. And it's about actually having people in those positions that can make influential decisions, that can make policies, that can make decisions about things that influence people in communities. And without that, I think what you get is this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, like an acceleration to the top and a race to the bottom, if you want to call it that. And by that, I'm not saying that any particular group of people at the bottom and another group of people at the top. But what I'm saying is that it feels like the gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as that gap gets bigger, it becomes harder for people like myself and Gabriel in youth work to be able to accurately communicate how we fill that gap, because young people watch the news, they see stuff on social media and that kind of stuff, and they see what's going on. In actual fact, if I know I've used police as an example, but in Manchester, I find it staggering that if you look at how multicultural Manchester is, there isn't one black senior police officer if you go on, if you just start, I mean, I did this a few weeks ago. If you go onto JMP's website and if you look at their senior leadership team, they've got all the pictures on the website of all different officers. And I mean, I'll let you go on and have a look and see what you think of it, but it backs up what I'm saying. And so then when you take that message back down to the people on the street, the PCs and all those sorts of people that are out there doing their policing, as they're interacting with people in the communities, I don't always feel that they're given permission or understand how to deal with those communities, because it's not felt or understood at the top, if that makes sense. And I think that's one of the challenges. And I think if you take that to a slightly more, thinking about it in a slightly more global way, that's certainly what's happening in America. And it's certainly the experience of, some of the headlines that we're seeing in the papers at the moment and on the news every night. So that's my sort of 10 pence worth. As an organisation, I think what we've got to try and do is just be open to everyone, give young people the chance to have a voice, to feel like they're being listened to. I know in education there are sort of statistics around exclusions and stuff. I know in the criminal justice system there are statistics that you can find fairly easily about what the outcomes are for certain sort of people of certain ethnicities, particularly around going into prisons and that kind of stuff, and also around stop and search and that kind of stuff. And in my head, as we think about all this stuff and all the issues that have been thrown up over the past few months, we've got to start asking ourselves why that's happening and what we're going to do to change it. I think for me as well, part of that change is, rather than kind of my generation saying, right, this is what needs to happen, we need to be talking to young people and asking them what would it take for you to feel like you could be confident to be a head teacher in a multicultural high school in 10 years' time? What would it take for you to put aside all your prejudices about what you think the police may or may not think about you, and for you to be able to for you to be able to become a senior officer and to be up in the top of the tree making decisions and policies that will affect people and your brothers and sisters and the younger people coming through the system? And I think that conversation has been had probably numerous times with our generation. When I say our generation, I mean the old 45-year-olds like me. And I feel like there's got to be a new way of engaging young people. I think it's really, I was quite very supportive of what Gabriel said about getting young people to think about politics, and getting people like Akala, who's a fantastic author, fantastic person, who's got an amazing story. Getting people like him, putting young people in front of people like him to talk about their experiences, is probably as powerful as you can get, really. And in closing, really, for us at Engage, I don't want to see anybody being discriminated against because of the colour of skin. I don't want to see anybody being discriminated against because of anything, to be honest with you. I feel like we need to have a society where as Christians, we're accepting people, we try to give them the same opportunities. I would not be doing my job now, and I wouldn't be sat here talking to you if people hadn't got alongside me. And I think there's something about role models and about sort of people getting alongside, people coming through now and getting alongside them and helping them and making them realise that they can achieve stuff. Because if I'm honest, if I talk to some of the young people I work with, they won't want to engage with the police at the moment. And I know people going on about police, other people as well. And I think sort of some of the experiences that Gabriel shared is certainly stuff that I can echo, and I know our young people can echo. So it's about giving them the confidence to make changes in their lives, so that when they get to our age hopefully things will be different. And maybe our generation needs to be the ones that are helping and supporting people who are coming up, rather than necessarily feeling like it's our responsibility to change stuff on our own. So I don't know if that's how useful that is.
Thank you so much, Christy. That's absolutely excellent. I was frantically making notes again on what you were saying, because I think there's a lot of gold in what you're sharing. I think both of you really brought out some really important and key points that are very similar. I love what you both said about kind of in sharing both of your stories about the early years. I mean, I know that I could then share my experiences of how kind of race and racism played a part in my life. I remember, because I've only been, I came into the UK when I was 14 years old. So, which is an interesting time for a young teenage girl to come to the UK. And so when going straight into year 11, and I experienced racism for the first time at the age of 14. And I just didn't know what it was at the time, because I'd grown up not knowing I was really Black, as kind of growing up in Africa, being in a Black majority country, you don't realize that you're Black until somebody says. So it was quite a shock to the system. So what you're saying about the early years, they really do matter. And there is something about then, if we're not careful, this stuff that is thrown at you really early on becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're called, like what you were saying, Gabriel, and a bit of what you said similarly, Christy, if the names that you're called, if you're called aggressive and rude, and, I see this a lot in my daughter who's 10 years old, she never gets to be spirited. She's sassy. What is she? Or is she just a 10-year-old girl with spirit? So these names then, or what is said to you has an impact, doesn't it? And it matters. And so then this stuff then becomes part of a self-fulfilling prophecy if it's not taken care of. So actually there is a lot to be said about how we even allow or how we even kind of illuminate people in these conversations around what is said to young people really early on. So I just kind of want to talk a little bit more about what you both said that really hit me really, about the importance of giving young people a voice. Gabriel, what you were saying about what you do in M13, of how you empower young people to have a sense of agency and to feel like they've got a role to play in politics. How is that working out for the young people that you're, because obviously it's really easy to feel like a victim, isn't it, in this whole thing? But how is this working out for them? How are you seeing them interact with what they're faced with now, based on the fact that you are allowing them to get involved in the issues and politics? Like, what difference is that making?
The politics project was kind of like a time-specific project, which lasted for about 6 months. But in terms of the conversations we have with young people every day on every detached session, and a lot of it at the moment revolves around schooling and the kind of boundaries which they face from school, but also the police as well. It's constantly about empowering them to feel like they can make social action and they can make change. And that is the first and kind of like the biggest mountain which they have to overcome. For us, it's about highlighting the fact that first, it's an injustice that they experience and that they shouldn't become acquainted to that injustice, and it shouldn't be normalized for them. So highlighting that is the first point. And then hearing the voices of the multitude of people that feel the same about it, to let them know that they're not alone, and that us as adults, as professionals, we side with them, and we will speak for them when necessary. But more importantly, giving them the platform to speak for themselves, whether it's to teachers or to their parents, and speaking out against it. And for us, it's at that stage of young people now at the moment where we're almost galvanizing the troops to think and to listen to each other. And this is going to be kind of like the rebirth of our new politics group, hopefully, of getting young people together and seeing that their concerns are communal as well, not by themselves, and knowing that there's strength in numbers. So for me, it's about hearing the needs, making young people aware that where the environment they face themselves in is not normal, because there's a danger that they can grow up thinking this is just the way it is, and there's nothing wrong in it. That teachers can kick me out of class for coughing too loudly, or for having a hairstyle which might be deemed as gangish. Letting them know that that's not right, and then standing with them and supporting them with it, and getting the collective voice heard. I hope that answers your question.
That's really key, isn't it? No, it really does. Thanks so much, Gabriel. I think that's really key, isn't it, in terms of actually empowering them to feel like, no, you can challenge the injustice, which is step one, I think, sometimes of feeling like you talked about loads of things that you let go, and you kind of think, well, there's no point in getting involved in that because I see that it's an injustice, but is there any point? But starting from the point of actually thinking, no, I can challenge this, that in itself is such an empowering thing. And I bet, Christy, you guys see that when young people come face to face with Engage, being spoken to in a way that they've never been spoken to before, maybe, or being treated with dignity, which is something that I know you're passionate about. I bet you see that as well. And what difference does that make, feeling like actually young people are being treated with dignity?
I always kind of try to think that we've got to try and model what we're asking young people to grow up into. And so if we're aggressive, dismissive, don't listen to their points of view, that kind of stuff, if they get enough of that at home, at school, out in the community, then that's what they become. So Engage is really trying to be quite countercultural and just speaking positively about young people. You know, I'm not going to lie, some of the young people that we work with are incredibly challenging. But I could tell you, all of our staff could find something or a few things positive about them as well. And we make sure that we reinforce that with them as well, and make sure that everybody leaves. And there's something else as well, particularly on our building-based stuff. I don't think any young person would ever leave a session without being spoken to by every member of staff. And it could just be a hello, how are you doing? But it's quite a deliberate thing that we're trying to just build relationships with people. And I think to sort of answer your question, yeah, it's just about modelling it, isn't it? And if we show it to them, if we show it to young people, it becomes normal and they grow up with it and try and put it into their own lives and just encourage them to be like that.
No, I fully agree. And I think what really struck me as well is with what you both was, saying, was the importance of addressing the inferiority factor among not just young people, but I know that loads of kind of Black people will have directly or indirectly face that with the way that the language is used, with the way the things are kind of portrayed, systemic injustice, racism, microaggressions, and all of that. I loved what came out with regards to speaking about education. So we've been talking about this a lot as a family. We've been talking about this. We've seen the argument in the papers about the importance of educating people from the ground up, that there isn't the education around empire and colonialism in the education system is, in my opinion, a failure in our education system. Because actually, we're talking about my arrival in the UK, for example, as a 14-year-old girl, kind of experiencing racism or overt racism, let's say, for the very first time. But I'm no stranger to white supremacy, even kind of from Africa. So, growing up, feeling as though, even kind of in the language that's used, the importance of feeling as though kind of some going to a British institution for education was more was better than going to an African institution, for example, and that in itself being ingrained in your understanding. Speaking English, I don't come from an English-speaking country, and yet feeling as though we had to speak English in order to be heard and understood, and in itself being that becomes kind of normalized. So we know that this is stuff that we internalize really early on. So when we're talking about dismantling systems and starting with the education of actually how this stuff came to be is really empowering, because actually it gives you a voice, doesn't it? It makes you understand the history behind what we are experiencing. And I think there is a real argument for the overhauling of the education system here in the UK. So I'm really interested, I guess, both of and any of you really kind of taking this up, on what difference you think that will make, especially in post 2020, you know, the biggest civil rights movement that we're living outside of the 60s. What difference will that make now to the conversations we're having? I guess any of you can take it, Gabriel or Christy.
I think if there's an accurate portrayal of the history from slavery, racism, racist laws which are implemented, like Jim Crow in America, civil rights, and the oppression Black people of color faced. The current context and the narrative which is portrayed by mainstream media would be very different. So understanding the history of kind of like the prison system, I'll use America as an example, how after slavery, it was a criminal offense that after slavery, criminal offenses were made to try and recapture free Black slaves into slavery, such as loitering, very looking at very little, well, not even criminal offenses, I don't know what the word I'm trying to use, but things which would not be described as criminal offenses, loitering, being in large groups. These kind of laws were in place to recapture slaves, put them into prison, and that was the early creation of mass incarceration of Black people. Now looking at today's systems of prison, where I believe 35% of 35% of the prison system in America is Black people, yet they represent 13% of the population. And understanding the dangers in that why is it that there's large majority of Black people in prison in the UK, or a disproportionate number within the US and also in the UK, understanding the history of it, which can now give us clues to the current context. I think that is what's going to be very helpful. We have to look at the history to understand the current context.
Anything to add to that, Christy? Because I know you guys are looking at, you know, so you're in the education system, etc. So thinking about the importance of teaching accurate history, the means of giving a voice.
I've not come across a huge amount of schools that do a huge amount of Black history. I know that every October there's Black History Month, and they'll quite often do something for a couple of days if they can find time in the curriculum. I've always found it fascinating that we do history about the world wars, and various other bits and pieces, but there's other things that we're perhaps less proud of in our history that we seem reluctant to talk about. And I think too, it's about leveling up, isn't it? If we're talking about world wars that have impacted a certain section of society or sections of society, then if we've got Black children in our schools who've been impacted and who are still being impacted by the historical stuff that's happened all those years ago, why would you not want to teach them about it? Why would you not want to give them the best opportunity to make informed decisions about what they think about it? And I think I just don't think schools necessarily, I don't know, maybe it's a curriculum, maybe it's a pressure to get the right GCSEs, by right GCSEs, I'll put that in inverted commas. But yeah, maybe there's a sense that we don't want to talk about it because it might uncover some stuff we're not happy to talk. We don't want people to think about.
Yeah.
And and the challenge that will be then on teachers, and that will be on staff, and the kind of the preparedness of dealing with those conversations. I think there's a lot to be said about creating space and not being equipped fully to deal with it. You're absolutely right, I think, on that. And yeah, I know, like you both said, the importance of actually dealing with history and presenting the fuller picture, which we really haven't yet had. And you see this by kind of the prominence of how much people are consuming kind of Akala's book, and how much people are really interested in reading up on what's happening at the moment, because people don't have an understanding. So this questioning of this stuff that we're seeing is prominent in America, but not really in the UK, is completely inaccurate, because we don't talk fully about it. We don't teach well enough about it in schools. So there's a lot to be said about what we need to do about that. But I am so aware of the time, and I know that it's 1 minute past 8. Andrew, do we have any more questions that we can then delve further into?
Yeah, I had somebody who's tried to get on, but through technical issues on their side, they were unable to register in the Zoom. But knowing this is going on, and they sent me a question about 20 minutes ago on text, and their question was, how do we make progress in changing the generational spiral of racism? What practical issues, you're saying, what practical issues can we as individuals do to change this generational spiral of racism? That was a question that was posed to me.
It's a very big question. Christy.
I've heard a few times in my life people saying to me, I'll very quickly share a story. Right? So someone contacted me on social media a few weeks ago and said, I've not spoken to this person since I was probably 11, 12, and they found me on Facebook, and they contacted me and they said, I want to apologise to you, because when we were at school, I used to call you all sorts of really, really vile things that I wouldn't even dare say to you now, and I want to apologise. But, and there's a little, this was a but with a capital B. A lot of this stuff was just what my parents told me it was okay to say. So I didn't really think about it. I just said it because it was kind of, my parents said it was normal to say this kind of stuff. And I think to answer that question, we've got to just keep challenging everyone and everything and everyone that says anything that's inappropriate and anything that's not like, I don't know the word. He was using his family's experience. He was using his upbringing and just saying, look, this is just this is just the way I was brought up, and it's not my fault. And I think that we need to challenge that narrative and challenge that this is just the way it is. And for every young person, for all of us, we just need to be thinking about actually saying, no, actually it's not okay to use that language, and it's not okay to be like that. And I still think now there is a bit of a generational thing sometimes where people just say stuff and then they kind of catch themselves and say, oh, sorry, it's my parents that used to speak like that.
I think you're right. One of the things that really strikes me about that question, Andrew, is that 2 days ago was the 28th of August. And for those who know your history, you know that the 28th of August is a significant day in history in terms of it's the 57th anniversary of the Dr. King speech, I Have a Dream. Now, we know that Dr. King made that speech, kind of nearly 60 years ago, hoping that when we're talking about this 60 years on, the stuff that he dreamed about would have come to pass. And yet 57 years on, we're still marching, right? We're still talking about this, and we're still wrestling and grappling in many ways with the same issues that he grappled with then. So his dream is still just that, still just a dream. And so that in itself can feel really jarring, can't it? When you're looking at this and you're seeing the spiral through generations of the pain of injustice, which many Black people have lived with on a day-to-day basis. I know that as a family, we have wrestled firsthand with wrongful accusations, wrongful imprisonment, and all of this stuff then being passed down from generation to generation. It feels tiring. So I was reading something from Michelle Obama, because I actually felt really tired this week, and I felt quite hopeless, you know, kind of thinking, how long, you know, if Dr. Martin Luther King marched peacefully, you know, and we didn't see change. And then you see that in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s. And here we are in 2020, you know, the year of promise, I guess. We all thought that by the year 2020, you know, we'll have like flying cars and, you know, Vision 2020, right? You know, just we would have arrived. And this is the year that everybody's kind of living the dream. That's not where we are. It can make you feel really tired. So when I was reading this post from Michelle Obama, she captured a lot of what I felt in my heart. So I would just want to read a little bit of what she wrote. She talked a lot about the shooting of Jacob Blake, and she talked about how, you know, people are protesting. That in itself can look a bit pointless when we don't see change, and yet we know that that gives people directed action. But the importance of continuing to use your bullhorns, your ballots, to reform policies in our cities, neighborhoods, speaking out wherever you are, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in dining rooms, in break rooms, in locker rooms. And then she says, because if enough of us do that, we'll open up even more minds, and maybe we can prevent the next name from being added to this seemingly unending list of tragedies. I do think there's a lot to be said about the continued fight, passed on from generation to generation, and also the fact that actually this stuff, although it's been a long time coming, it's a baton that we can't then lay down, because unfortunately here we are, still not yet realizing that dream. And so it's important to keep on fighting until that is a reality that not just we're living, but that our children are living, and so on and so forth. So I think it can feel like, you know, for Christians, we talk about the kingdom of heaven being here, but not yet. It can feel a little bit like there's change, because obviously there's been a lot of change since Dr. Martin Luther King, but there's also lots that needs to continue. So we hold that tension, don't we, of the fight continues, and yet we celebrate the stuff that's already happened. Even the fact that we're talking about this now in a relatively safe sense, this is in a way a realization of what he saw, but we know that it's not the completion of it. So I think, yeah, the question of the injustice and the, you know, passed down from generation can feel really tiring, but it's important to keep talking about it so that we can maybe realize it for generations to come.
Thanks a lot, Beatrice.
Can I add one?
Just one, yeah, one quick thing, Gabriel. Great.
Like it's almost asking a very difficult task to stay open to dialogue and an educative process, but also being able to challenge, having that angle of experiences of trauma, along with challenging overt racists, the types like Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, who don't want to be educated, who have put their stand on where they want to do. And almost for those type of people, there has to be a challenge, a strong challenge, standing against their racism and speaking out, but also being open to those who kind of just drifted to their ignorance through their way of living, family ties, and being able to have dialogue with them. A quick example, kind of like Christie's, I had a white friend who during this George Floyd situation messaged me and was like, I was very ignorant to my white privilege. We used to have so many long debates about white privilege, and pro-black being anti-white. But seeing what's happened, he actually messaged me saying, I apologize. But that was a relationship with a friend that I opened the dialogue. I kept the dialogical process open to him. And where I could have easily kind of snapped at him, challenged him aggressively, or taken a different approach. So yeah, the point I'm making, it is a very difficult task, which has kind of been appointed to us to do. And both kind of approaches are necessary. When is the question? The wisdom to use both, yeah, or use either is the question. Thanks,
Gabriel. Listen, if I could just take it from you now, Beatrice, just want to say a huge thank you to Beatrice for leading us through, and with Gabriel and Christy for incredible insight and challenges and thought-provoking ideas that will come to many of us. And thank you for the opportunity. I know there's been a connection already between Tom and Gabriel, and some sort of link up there to help and that sort of thing. But in these last few minutes, if I can just hand it over to Helen. Helen's just going to lead us in just a 2 or 3 minutes reflection before we end our session tonight. Thanks a lot, Helen.
Thank you. I apologise if it's slightly longer than the 2 or 3 minutes, but in talking, Gabe at the end mentioned anger, and I was thinking about anger. Our rightly human response to injustice is anger, and young people are very attuned to injustice, and they rightly feel anger at the way that they are treated badly. And we're not very good as adults at dealing with young people's anger and allowing that anger and working with it and helping them to use it constructively. Worse than that, we suppress it often, and we frustrate it, I think, and we don't allow young people to express what's really going on, and we don't listen to that. And I was reminded of something that Audre Lorde writes in her amazing book. So she's a poet, American Black poet, and she is talking about women's anger, but I think this applies to young people as well. So she says, every woman, but we could say every young person, because they feel anger so acutely at a sense of injustice, every young person has a well-stocked arsenal of anger, potentially useful against those oppressions, both personal and institutional, which brought that anger into being. Focused with precision, it can become a powerful source of energy, serving progress and change. And when I speak of change, she says, I do not mean a simple switch of positions or a temporary lessening of tensions, nor the ability to smile or feel good. I'm speaking of a basic and radical alteration in those assumptions underlining our lives. So perhaps one of the things to think about in our work with young people is hearing their anger, recognizing it, allowing it, working with it and helping them use it. Because if young people don't have anger, if they have acceptance of this injustice, that is not a good position for us to be in. We need to allow it and we need to work with it. And equally, as Christy was saying, we need to be models. We not only need possibility models, but as adults, I think we need young people to see us taking action. We cannot sit back and say words and not take action. We cannot make noise and not take action. For me, for all of us, Christianity is a faith, a faith of action. Jesus calls us to follow him. So it's about us taking action together through listening and maybe using that anger, that righteous anger against the sin of racism to make change. So I will finish there. Thank you for that opportunity to share that reflection.
Thanks very much, Helen. We're going to finish now. This actual has been recorded, as I mentioned earlier on, and it will be available sometime next week on www.mosaicjusticenetwork.org. And hopefully a lot of other people will see it. We're pushing out into different organisations. And I know there's going to be other conversations that are going to be taking place as a result of these 3 conversations with Mosaic Justice Network. And so just watch this space. And thank you once again for everybody coming in tonight and all the participants and everybody else. It's been really appreciated. And hopefully you have a good evening. If I can just stay on with Tim right at the end, that'd be great. But thank you, everybody, and enjoy your bank holiday tomorrow. Bless you.
Thank you so much. Bye.